Recording in progress. Okay. It's going to be a great time.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Does that sound interesting and cool?
To go. Damn, I look so good.
Let's just wing it. You ready? 4 hours later.
Yeah. Dear Tech.
That made me tired.
Oh, laughing hurts. Cut.
Welcome back to the Dear Tech podcast. And today we're asking, Dear Tech, so the sky fell. What now? Fran, what now?
Hold on, let me call my therapist and ask. That's a darn good question.
Wait, so
I
essentially, like we had a previous episode, is the sky falling, and that was more so about the economy and getting laid off and stuff. So I think this one we're heading more towards, after getting laid off, what do we do? What does one do next, right?
Yeah. I think it's a great follow-up. And I think first off, I really kind of just wanted to jump into first off the effects of layoff and talking a little bit more about that experience, what it's like, what people are likely dealing with. I know you and I are both in jobs right now and haven't been impacted by layoffs since the pandemic, but so many of our friends, former colleagues, people we've worked with past and present, so many people we know have unfortunately been impacted by layoffs, and we all see it on LinkedIn every single day. Like we just saw a number of companies within the last week have more layoffs come out. So first, I really just wanted to kind of talk about how you deal with that type of experience, what's going through people's heads, how different people are dealing with it. Like I've seen, I don't know about you, but I know I've seen on LinkedIn, a lot of people in different places of how they're reacting to that experience. I've seen a lot of people talk about making posts and reminding themselves and their peers, like this isn't tied to your value or your worth. So remind yourself of that. I think a lot of people, it's like you start to doubt yourself or have self-doubt about your capabilities and your skills, but you're reminding yourself that it's not about your skill. It's not personal. I've seen people have very, very personal posts on LinkedIn about they've been looking for jobs for 6 months and they have kids to feed and their bills are piling up and they don't know what to do, and people have been getting desperate. It's been really intense. So I kind of wanted to just initially start talking about that, hear your thoughts, what you've seen, what you've heard.
That's true. So LinkedIn and it used to be,
And it's not, but it used to be the better social media in terms of it didn't feel like a drain. It wasn't people showing off. It wasn't just I have money or I have XYZ. It was just work and jobs and I'll help you get a job. And it was very, in my opinion, a happy place. It was my happy place to an extent. I feel like a lot of recruiters might think that. But now it is, and I think you and I have this conversation at least, once every other day, that it is so depressing and sad. And it's because it's just everyone, not everyone, but the layoff posts outweigh the I got a new job post, the promotion post, the hey, this event was awesome post. More than 50% of the posts today are layoffs, right? And even, people who aren't laid off, it increases their anxiety, right? It increases everyone's anxiety. And it's definitely a, it kind of seeps into, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but I feel like LinkedIn, it's a phenomenon that now that's seeping into other companies' cultures. Because back in the day, it was water cooler talk in your own water coolers. Now, company X's water cooler talk seeps into your water cooler, right?
Yeah.
So it's affecting your culture. So I think that, and outside of that, yeah, the self-worth thing is huge because, especially when there's mass layoffs and it's not like you got laid off as a onesie or a twosie, which does happen as too. But when you have mass layoffs, and I was laid off at the beginning of 2020 during COVID, there is a good stretch of time when you're sitting there and you're like, I got laid off, but person X didn't get laid off. Like, how far was I from the line of getting laid off? What could I have done better? And you have to realize, like, 9 times out of 10, it was almost drawn out of a hat, right? It was like, oh, there's these two people that are doing functions that maybe one of them can do. And they like, they're not saying they flip a coin. I don't know what your company's, idea is to do that, but they might as well, because your work wasn't, it's not because you weren't good, because then you would have been fired. It's different. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's nerve-wracking. It definitely is. And it takes a while to get over because it is grief and it has to be processed. But the other thing is, when you do get laid off, it's almost, and we've used relationship analogy before for certain things about jobs, but very many times people want to rebound, right? And get the next job as soon as possible, take whatever they can. And that's something that needs to be addressed too, is that, obviously you need to take care of your family, but is taking the first thing that comes up always the answer? So that's stuff that we can get into in a bit. But yeah, getting laid off is definitely nerve-wracking. Looking at it at LinkedIn is definitely nerve-wracking. But one thing that I will say, one thing that you should not do, I'm going to go ahead and say it because I've seen a couple of these, less now, but in the beginning of this year, maybe at the end of last year, I saw it a few times where people were like, oh yeah, like 3,000 people got let go from my company. I'm blessed that I wasn't one of them. And it's like, yeah, that's not a post you need to make, right? Like, if you didn't get laid off, shut your mouth and just be grateful on your own time. Don't do that. But I definitely have seen a lot of posts of not having worked for 6 months. But I will say, over the last 2 weeks, I've seen a decent number of an uptick, if anything, of people saying, hey, I just got a new job after being laid off for like not working for 3 months, 6 months. So I don't know if that's a sign that things are shifting around. I'm not going to say that it is or it isn't, but there has been a decent number more recently for me that I've seen the people getting jobs. So that's exciting.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think you can have gratitude for your situation while reading the room, and the room being LinkedIn, and not needing to post about that, depending on the context. But I was going to ask you, from what you were sharing before, depending on how personal this is for you, do you mind sharing about your experience when you got laid off, what you were feeling, what you went through, and what steps you took after that?
Yeah, we can talk about that. So
Besides binge drinking and all that, no, I'm kidding. Tell us your authentic experience.
Yeah, no, I'll be transparent. So it was March 2020, I think. I'm pretty sure it was around that time. So just as pandemic
Right
was
at this
starting.
peak. Yeah, damn. Or
Yeah,
start.
just as it was starting up, we had basically, yeah, it's probably after that. It's probably like April, actually. April, May. That actually makes more sense. Yeah, because I actually, no, I mixed it up. So I got Kobe in March. I got my dog in March. I got laid off in May, right? So I'm at 2 M's. I got laid off in May, and I was working at an agency at the time, and we had been remote for the first time ever, and agencies traditionally hate the word remote, right? Agency recruitment. So it was a transition for them, but work had slowed down a lot. And you know, it was something that they were looking at, and they were letting go of a bunch of people. Like, they let go of people in different offices and everything. And I was one of the people that they let go of in the Dallas office at the time. And if I'm being honest, initially it was a mixed bag of feelings, because I was kind of, before COVID hit late 2019, I was already looking. And so when I got laid off, I was stressed out because I was like, I need to make rent and all this other stuff. And I was actually looking to buy a house at that time. So that was another thing. But I was also like, okay, and we didn't know what the pandemic was. We didn't know what was going to happen. So I was like, okay, like, I'll just, I'll find a job right away and it'll be fine. And so what I initially did was what everyone does, I think. Not everyone, but many people do, unless you have a really big savings account. You were kind of thinking this might happen, but if you're not, you're like, okay, I got to find a job today, right? So what I did was, I went out there and I applied to every job I could find that had the word recruiter in it in Dallas, and I went crazy. And I applied to a few big companies. I actually had a few interviews with some companies that were really cool. And the companies that I was interested in weren't interested in me. And the companies that I was like indifferent about, or maybe even not so excited about, those were the ones I was getting callbacks from. And I even got to a point with 2 companies where I was like near the offer round. Okay. There's one, the problem was also when you have multiple quote unquote offer situations, even if they're all not great offers, you will take the one that's the least crappy because you're not thinking about what else is out there. So luckily, the least crappy one did not give me an offer. They changed their mind. They're like, you know what, we're not going to do what we were initially planning because this COVID thing seems like it's going to be longer than 3 months. And the offer I wasn't excited about was ready to make an offer, but it was like, it just didn't feel great. So I didn't take it. And basically around that time, my lease was wrapping up and I didn't renew the lease because I thought I was going to buy a house. And I just didn't, it was really like a standstill moment for me. And it was probably one of my lowest moments because after that, I thought again that it was going to be a short time. So I was like, you know what? I'll stay at an extended stay America for like a couple weeks and then I'll figure it out and I'll move into an apartment. So I took all my furniture and I put it in storage and I moved into this extended stay America. And I'll tell you, Fran, if I'm being honest with you, my close friends know this. That was probably the scariest moment of my life when I actually moved in. I'm a very positive person. But I remember one of my best friends called me and he was like, how are you? And I was like, for the first time he's ever heard me say, I was like, I'm not okay because I just didn't know what I was doing. My dog's crate that I have wasn't fitting in this extended stay America. That's how small this place was. Like, wasn't opening up. And he was such a good boy during that time. He did not give me any problems. And I had a really good friend in Dallas who the day that I moved in, the next day he was flying to Chicago for something for a week. And he offered to have me move in with him for a little bit. He had a 2-bedroom. He was like, just come stay. And I was being prideful. And he left and he comes back a week later and I'm like shook, right? At this point, I'm so shook. And he's like, dude, just come live with me. I was like, sure. I'm not even gonna, like, as soon as he said it, I was like, you could have said it earlier, bro. I'm ready to move in. But from that point, after I like kind of was able to take a step back and reassess everything, things kind of changed. And then I decided to take a break and then I found an apartment to move into. And it was a whole other thing. But that initial shock, I just consistently made not great decisions because it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. I thought, oh, okay, I was laid off. I'll get another job. I'll start working. And then as things started happening where I didn't get the jobs that I wanted initially, I turned down an offer. And then it was like, oh, this thing is lasting a little bit longer than I want it to. It kind of started to spiral. And then we can get to what I did to actually get a job. But that was, I basically took 1 year off of work, but that initial shock was very scary. And it just was, it's because, and the issue is, and I think Mike Tyson has a quote, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, or punched in the mouth. And that's exactly what it was, because when I got laid off, I had a plan. And then I got punched in the mouth and I kind of froze. Right. So, yeah, that's how my layoff experience went.
Thank you for sharing. My the optimist in me would challenge your perspective on the mistakes you made in the beginning, that those weren't mistakes, or maybe they were mistakes, but they led you to where you are today, so they were necessary.
Oh no, I agree. Oh, I absolutely agree. I will even say as much to say that even though that week that I stayed in the extended stay is to date was the scariest time where I was like, I felt homeless, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't change it. I really wouldn't, because that entire year that I didn't work and that 1 week's perspective of how blessed I actually am, because that's what that did for me, right? Because, like if things really didn't work out, I was blessed enough that I had several other options. I could move back with my parents. I can do all these other things. But that week gave me perspective on,
there are people that didn't have those options, didn't get to
your audio swapped again. Sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I'm gonna break something. I'm trying to figure out what.
It came back now, but it's like
No, I know,
out.
I know it came back, but it's flip-flopping, and I really need it not to do that. And so I'm going to.
Do you know why it's doing that?
I don't, and it's very new thing that's happening. I'm gonna try one other thing.
Sorry.
And actually, so ironically enough, I might even not edit out some of this stuff because some of it is just I don't know. I feel like it's working. Can you hear your own echo when you talk?
No, I'm echoing.
No, I'm asking you now because I just took off my AirPods.
Oh, no, I don't hear an echo.
Okay, solid. Let's go.
Okay.
Back to your regular scheduled programming, y'all. It's fine. It's fine. But anyway, yeah. So what I was saying was, I think that perspective helped me make better decisions later, but also I think it also made me the person today that I am, in the sense that like gratitude is my number one default setting in my brain. And it's because of that week of living scared for a week. Yeah.
Outside, thank you for sharing all that, by the way. Outside of that perspective shift, what, like in hindsight now, what tools, experiences do you think helped you get through that time after being laid off, whether tangible or intangible?
I think so. I want to. What I'll say is, and earlier when we were talking about this topic, I was saying that I don't know how great I feel talking about it because everyone's experience in this is different, right?
Yeah.
And me being, a single guy with a dog, me saying certain things won't resonate with someone who has a family to feed, right? And I'm
Yep.
hyper aware of that because, again, a part of that gratitude is like, if I say, oh, I just kept a positive attitude, like the fuck is that going to do for someone who has to feed a family, right? And so and I'll answer your question, but again, I want to make sure that for someone out there who is going through this experience but has significantly more responsibilities, like we feel for you, and hopefully we can share some stuff that'll help. But for me personally, initially I made sure, or let's jump back to hindsight. I think in hindsight, what I would have done more of was taken a step back and gave myself some time to process, because I really did start applying right away, and kind of like a fish out of water, because I've never been out of work before, right? And mind you, at that time, unemployment for COVID was pretty sweet, if I'm being honest, right? It was like $1,000-something a week. So that was one thing, but at the same time, I'm also someone who finds value of themselves in their work. I don't like, as much as my friends, we have a joke that I like being lazy. I don't, in the sense that I do like accomplishing things. So one is taking a step back, reevaluating where you're at. And then from there, you have to see what you need to do. And what do I mean by that? You may, depending on your situation, need to get a job as soon as you can, in which case you do that, right? You go out there and you find out what jobs you can do, and you make a spectrum of, this is the job that I'm qualified for, this is my dream job, and this is a job that I can do that I'm not excited about, but it'll pay some of my bills, right? And you go out there and you find the job that you can get. And then after that, you can take a step back again and value it and be like, all right, now that I have this job, let's look for the job that'll replace the career that I stepped away from, right?
Yeah.
Like for me now, again, knock on wood, but I'm a recruiting manager, and honestly, I'm very proud of that job. I love doing it. But if I got laid off and I had a family to feed, I would go back to being a recruiter, right? That we would all have to, if we had to, we would do that. Even though our first thing is, especially for you and me, we enjoy leadership, we enjoy that extra aspect of the job. But if you don't have that luxury, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. I think those are really good points. I think that makes me like, I think stepping back is really important too. Like I've seen and again, this is not judgment, not right or wrong, but I've seen a lot of people post immediately day of that they've been affected by layoffs. And then I've also seen people post like a week or month out that they've been affected by a layoff and share their different experiences. And I can only imagine myself in that situation, being like my brain being in fight or flight mode and not being able to think in my like normal like baseline of logic. And so trying to take action immediately wouldn't be allowing me time to like process my feelings and the emotions of being laid off. So I resonated with that for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's everyone. Like we all, as much as change is constant, we don't want it, right? Like unless we decide it to happen, we don't want
You're
it,
in control of it, yeah.
right? Unless it's in your control. So when something like this happens, um, you almost you want to make like a flow chart, like what should I do next type of thing, where it's like, all right, you get laid off on hopefully not a Friday because that's horrible, but let's say on a Monday, right? And you get to finish 2 weeks and then you get another month or two of severance, right? And this is like, I'm guessing and hoping that's the kind of policies your company has. Let's say you have a month of severance. So you work 2 more weeks and then a month of severance. Well, then guess what? The beauty of it is you have roughly a month to take a breath, right? So you have a couple weeks, you have a week to do nothing, sleep, cry, eat your ice cream, do what you got to do. Then you have a week to process. Then you have a week to brush up your resume. Then you have a week to start applying, right? After that, yes, it gets a little bit tighter. And again, if you've been at a company longer, you have a little bit more of a runway. Regardless of all these things, you got to give yourself each of those stages so that you're not either making bad decisions or you're not overwhelming yourself. Because another thing you don't want to do is get halfway through an interview process and then you didn't give yourself time to process, and then you're almost at an offer with a job and then you like have like a panic attack or something, because that happens too, right? It's like all these different things. But yeah, so for sure.
Yeah, stages of grief. So okay, setting the groundwork here kind of on the emotional state and mental state and how we all experience, and hearing your experience about how we process our emotions after layoffs, like immediately after being impacted. I would also say for everyone listening, like if even from what you shared, like takeaways, obviously like leaning into your support groups, like your network, your friends, your family, like those are those times when you can like lean on people. If you have a therapist, if you have a dog, like whatever your thing is, like lean into your family and your crew and your people. Like it sounds like obviously you had some awesome people in your group who supported you during that time. And do what you need to do to process. It's a really tough experience. And then once we have gotten past that point, let's talk about like next steps, like diving into more. What do you think are different aspects or stages people should be thinking about on finding their next job in a market like we have today? Like it sounds like, and from what I remember back in, you said 2020 or 2021?
2020.
My like perception of dates and time is so warped. So back in 2020, the market I think was a little more lively for recruiters than it is today. What different like factors and items would you be thinking about when you're taking action to find your next job?
So initially 2020 actually was just as bad for recruiters because all the companies around like summer.
Oh, we went on pause, didn't we?
In the summer, everyone was like, oh, shoot, like this might be long term. Get rid of all your recruiters, right? And then immediately they were like, nope, we need all of our recruiters back, right? It was a good, I think that recruiting started picking up towards the end of the year. So it was like everyone got laid off May, June, and then everyone was getting picked up at the end of the year or whatever that was. But I think right now, because the thing is right now, the one thing that we have is uncertainty. That's the one thing that we really don't know. You know, I'd love to say Q3, Q4, or even this summer, we should have recruitment pick up for companies. But literally there was companies doing layoffs again last week, right? Like
in this week, yeah.
And like I saw like Disney and Pixar, some of these people they're losing their dream jobs, right? Which is what's heartbreaking. But I think when you're laid off in a time as uncertain as this, you have to take a second, in my opinion, you have to take a second and just separate the word job from the word career. Right. And the reason I say that is, though I'm not a proponent of rebounding, like I mentioned earlier, and I really don't think one should do that. depending on your situation, you might need to do a version of that. So if you have a family that you need to support, and you have a house payment, and you have bills, and you got laid off, take a second, take your time to process. You're going to have to do it. There will be a severance, because most companies are, unless your company is really, really small,
Hope there's.
right? Yeah. And if there isn't, look, then but you still need to process, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. But yeah, so if you're someone who has those things that you need to take care of, then you might need to take a job that's not going to better your career. Might, right? Depending on what part of tech you're in. If because sometimes you are a, very senior engineer, but you're getting a job, that's via maybe, a third party company as a contractor, right? And your rate's a lot lower. And you might need to do that just to tie the bills along. And maybe again, it might hurt you still. Your debt situation might not be better, but you might have to. So I think that's one of the things, is understanding that you might need to take a job that won't better your career. And that's okay. For a little while, that's okay, because look, the economy will get better, right? And I shouldn't, people be like, oh, you don't know that. But like, just historically speaking, it'll get better. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
So if you have to do that, you have to do that. Or if you're in a position where you don't, you're in a little bit better situation than that, and you don't need to get a job right away, then, or even if you're not, either way, actually, because if you're not working, you should be doing stuff during your day that helps you get a job or helps you better your career. So what do I mean by that? Can you take a course? Probably you can. Can you, learn new things? And it doesn't have to be paid stuff. You could do it on YouTube. Like, there's options, but that's one. Can you go to networking events, right? Can you go to meetups and meet people and talk to people? So all those things happen, but either way, you have to be flexible.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like I'm the kind of person who thinks about all the terrible scenarios that could happen, so I'm prepared, which isn't necessarily the healthiest thing, but it helps me be prepared. So I was like, for myself, I definitely think in the technical recruiting space, I definitely would, like, it's looking at, okay, is there another industry that I could move into? Is there an IC role that I could take on? Is like, even like, would I take like a waitressing job, like just to get cash and have tips, while at the same time, like in tandem, looking at upskilling? Like, are there courses I can take, just like you said, like networking events, like working on my resume, reaching out to people? There's definitely, I like the point you made about flexibility. Like, I've seen so many people, from like software engineers to QA analysts, who've been like consistently tied to media and tech companies their whole life, and they're shifting into legal, finance, healthcare. Like, they're shifting into other industries that are hiring right now. So I do completely agree. Like, the element of flexibility, as much as you can, is really important. I was also thinking about the point of, we've been talking about this so much, with my boss right now, and this has come out so much in the industry and the roles that we're hiring for, the element of AI and ML, the machine learning, and how it is integrating its way more and more into all functions of our industry, and the necessity to upskill yourself to be in line with how the market is shifting, and the level of automation that's taking place in jobs. So if you're not kind of thinking about the element, if you're not upskilling and utilizing those technologies, you're going to be out. Basically, your skill set is going to be expired at some point. So just another kind of thought I was thinking about.
No, for sure. And I think one thing that's great about the industry that we're in, like tech in general, if you're in tech and you're good at your job, then there's a decent chance that you're curious about this stuff anyway. Even if you're not technical, right? Even if you're a PM or a BA, you're in tech
Hey,
because
there's technical PMs and BAs.
100%,
For everyone who's
100%.
listening.
Yes, there are.
I see you.
And technical PMs and BAs, no, but there are non-technical PMs, non-technical BAs,
Yeah.
manual QA testers. But these people are also in tech. And if they're good at their job and they're serious, they're usually very much into learning about this stuff, reading stuff, listening to podcasts, stuff like that. So the beauty of it is, even if you're not laid off, right, you should be keeping your axe sharp, right? That's a whole other conversation, but it's true. And you know, again, as an industry, I would say tech is in there, right? Tech is an industry as a whole that continues to learn as a workforce. But I think when it comes to where we are in history, when it comes to open AI and all the AI stuff that's happening, you definitely want to be aware. You definitely want to be in it and learning. But especially if you just got laid off and you have all this extra time, make sure you show new employers the value of that time, that the value you're making of that time, right? And I've seen people, and this isn't during the recent situation, but even before, someone on their resume was like, "Oh, I got laid off in 2008." A tech person is like, and I volunteered at this place, at this like local school board, administering their IT for free. I did that for like 6 months. That's not that wasn't their job, but that's still experience, and it's still like, oh shit, this person was doing something, right? Again, they went from that to a few years later, now they're a Salesforce developer or admin or whatever, and it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's like, okay, like they did something, right? And then during when I was laid off, in the middle of it, I tried starting a startup, and again, that was me partially, like it was me and two other people, and they actually came to me to do it. But again, it's not one-to-one, but it's still industry experience. I was still out there talking to people about recruitment at that time, right? In one way, shape, or form, or trying to figure this thing out. So I think, what are you doing with that time? And that's just a question that you'll have to answer.
Yeah. I think I was trying to think through some like additional like nuggets and things that I've heard and seen and thought about that have worked for people during this time, if you have been laid off, and different aspects that you can be thinking about. And this is more granular, but it's something that I'd posted about, I think, of like maybe a month ago or two, and I've heard a lot of people talking about, is just the importance of networking. Like in today's, like the reality of our job market in the tech industry is so many functions and job postings that are out there are seeing like a exponentially higher number of applicants than we have historically because of the layoffs. So even more important than ever, I think, than ever before in a lot of circumstances, is networking. I think a good chunk of people are aware of this, but in case you're not, so many companies out there financially incentivize their employees to provide referrals. Every single company I've ever worked at has. Most large organizations, I don't personally have a ton of experience or knowledge in the startup space, but I know so many organizations financially incentivize their employees to refer candidates. And if the person you refer is hired, you get a sign-on bonus, like sizable in the thousands oftentimes. So what I recommend to people who are applying are go on LinkedIn, do a search. Like, you have your job notifications coming up, you see a job that you're going to apply to, go on LinkedIn, do a search of that company, see if you have any first, second, third connections, and reach out to those people directly. Now, typically you'll see anyone within talent acquisition or HR is going to be exempt from that payout. I would be spending like 10 hours on the weekend to get like an extra $5,000 in bonuses if we were not exempt. So if I were you and you're not in the TA space or HR space, perk your ears up right now. But so with that in mind, if I was someone who's looking for a job, go do my job search, get your notifications. I see a job I'm interested in. First, go on LinkedIn, see if I have first, second, or third connections, reach out to that person, craft your message, make it short, succinct, and direct, and include the job that you're applying to, and ask that person to refer you. Those people will literally get financially paid out if you get the job. So that would be one little tidbit I would recommend for anyone listening. And if you don't have any connections, try and find someone at the company who is on a team or close to the team, or even literally just like a random person. But I would try and find some tie, whether it's like you're in the same city as them, or you're in a similar function, or you have a similar interest. Try and find some tie to make it more relatable when you're reaching out to them. But reach out to people and ask for a referral, because they are financially incentivized to refer you.
I would make a little tweak, because so there's one because sometimes if you go into it and just ask for a referral on the initial message, some people are like, oh, like, or because if they're getting a lot of those, or you're just like, oh, you're just trying to use me. Mind you, they would get compensated, but sometimes that doesn't even click. So
Yeah.
what I did that actually, I did a few times. What I did was, if I saw a role that I liked and I had a first or a second connection, with thirds, it's a little bit different, and you might be better off just saying, hey, like, can you refer
Hey,
me?
I know your sister's grandma's brother's cousin.
Exactly. Or the hiring manager's grandma. No, I'm kidding. But what ends up, what you can do is, and this is, I've done this a few times, is, hey, person X, I saw a role at your company, and it looked really interesting to me, but I'm kind of curious to know what it's like working at your company. Can we have a chat about it? Have a video call with them or a phone call with them. And look, you really are applying to this job, so you genuinely should have some good questions about working at this company. Ask those questions. At the end, 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, hey, is there anything else I can do for you? Right? Or they'll ask you, do you need a referral? Right? If they don't, you can ask them. But if they don't, it's fine. And you just got a whole bunch of good information. You can ask them, which is, and I don't think they'll even mind it, because I think you'll be like, hey, like, by any chance, do you do referral codes? Is there a referral bonus? Because I'm going to apply anyway, but I'd love if you can get a referral. Like, it would be better for me too.
Yeah.
And that would be great. But I think if you go into it and not even mention referral and just say, hey, can you just tell me about your company? One, they'll be very honest. I had a friend of mine who moved to Seattle, worked at one of the companies in Seattle. You can narrow it down to which ones. And I asked them about the work culture. They were very transparent. I actually didn't apply to the company because I was like, that's not my thing. And so I think that's the beauty of it. And then the second part also is, yeah, at the end of the call, they'll probably ask you. And if they don't, you can ask, like, hey, like, is there a referral program for your company? I know they usually do bonuses. If there is, I'd love to do it. I'm going to apply anyway. What do you think? But no, friend, I 100% agree with you. Networking, even if it was for the rest of my life, my jobs are going to be coming from networking. Like, that's just the way that
Yeah.
I think
every single job I've ever gotten has been by leveraging my network.
That's the best way to do it. It's almost like, I don't know why I make finding a job equivalent to dating. I have no idea why I do that, but I do. And in this case, it's like meeting someone through friends. It's an automatic stamp of approval that this company is decent, right? It's decent enough for me to work there, so it's decent enough for you to work there, right? And very rarely will someone whose opinion I trust not tell me ahead of time, be like, hey, this company sucks, don't come here, I'm leaving. Most of the time, people that you trust will be very frank with you. So no, networking is the best ever. And I think especially now that COVID restrictions have lightened up, especially because I remember some of the networking events that I used to go to before as a recruiter in Texas, they had closed down, become virtual and stuff, and it wasn't as fun. Now they're not that anymore, right? So now you can go places and have a dinner, have a couple of drinks, meet some people, and it's a very social event. So I think networking events, meet up, look on Facebook, look on LinkedIn, but networking, even outside of just work, in anything you're trying to accomplish, I think networking is the secret. It's really the way to, because they say, right, like, if you hang around alcoholics all day, you'll become the sixth. Like, 5 of them, you become the sixth. If you hang out with millionaires all day, you become the next one.
Really? Shit, I need to change my I'm kidding.
All of Fran's friends, I know y'all are listening.
I love you all.
No, but the people, you are who you hang out with, and
Yeah.
so I think networking is a big part of that. So I definitely agree with you on that one.
I need to go find some millionaires.
They're cool. They're cool to hang out with. As if I'm hanging out with millionaires all the time. All right. So no, networking is definitely the big one. I was gonna say, so we talked about like classes and certification. So I used to have a thing where I used to talk about like going back to school. And it's a thought that I had when I first got laid off too. I was like, should I go get a master's? Just cause I wouldn't have to think about life if I did that. But what do you think? What do you think about getting like another degree if you get laid off in a time like this? Like, what are that's random. I know it wasn't even a thought for mine, but it's just something that I've been mulling over in thoughts. So what do you think about that?
So I have two opinions and trains of thoughts. One, what should be the case, and then one, what could be the case based on current state. So starting with what I think is something to keep in mind, in my personal opinion, I 100% think there's so many trade schools out there and coding camps and like functionally specific educational programs that are so much more valuable than a generic degree, for example. It's for me, I just got a bachelor's degree, and yes, I think I learned a lot of skills that support me in my job today, but by no means was it specific to technology, recruiting, or media. And so I think it will depend on your circumstance and what job you're going after. I do think there's a lot of like master's programs and educational programs out there that varying levels of degrees that can benefit you perhaps more in a leadership role or leadership capacity. But I will also take into account, and that by no means do I necessarily agree with this, there's so many organizations out there where you do still see a degree requirement on their job description. That's the reality of the world that we live in today. I think a lot of organizations are rethinking that approach, and you'll often see a degree and or relevant experience, but then there are still a fair amount of functions out there in the data space or in specific spectrums of technology where you do oftentimes see the degree requirement. So one, I do think it depends on your circumstance, the role that you're in, the function of the lane that you're in within technology, and what you're trying to accomplish. I do lean more towards like specific functionally aligned development programs though. Like I said, whether it like if you're a software engineer, I would, depending on the program, I without a doubt think a coding camp is going to be more beneficial to you than going and getting your bachelor's degree. I'm not a software engineer, so if anyone has data-based stats to refute my claim, send them my way. But I would lean more towards the side and recommend more towards the side of depending on your lane and what you're looking for, like technically, functionally specific education rather than a generic degree. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I think so. My tagline would be, if you weren't gonna get it anyway, don't get it because you got laid off. Okay. If you wanted to get it anyway, and we're actually gonna have a guest who's gonna talk about like an MBA in tech and what that looks like. And so that's something we can discuss. But in general, if it's not something you were gonna get no matter what, then you shouldn't get it because you get laid off. And I think mainly because one, this is your rebound. It's probably a bad idea. And the second one is, if you're getting a master's, that's a whole bunch of money, right? You're spending a bunch of money. And I love what you said about coding camps, right? So I think personally that if you're already in tech, if you're already a software engineer, don't go to the coding camp for the certification or the piece of paper. Get it for the experience. Go in there so that at your next job, even if, like, let's say you're transitioning into You're going, and this is totally an example, but let's say you're transitioning into like Salesforce, right? And you're not a Salesforce developer, but you got a Salesforce development certification, or you learned how to do Salesforce development, Lightning, whatnot. The thing is, it's not that you're going to use that certification to get a job. You might, but it's very unlikely that just that certification is going to get you your next gig, especially if you're pivoting from one thing to another. What it will do is if you go to a place that something in Salesforce, like they have a Salesforce environment, but it's very junior, you can raise your hand and spend 20% of your time in that environment and help out, right? Then you can shine and you can work more towards it. You want to use these courses to expose yourself to new things. Yes, sometimes the actual certification will boost you up, right? There's very many times there are very senior level certifications that are like, oh my gosh, there's only like 45 of these people in North America. Those exist. Those are great. But if I'm speaking to people who are a little bit more on the junior side, where maybe you know how to do certain things, but you're still needing that exposure. Well, guess what? If you do those coding courses and you go to a company that's a little bit smaller and maybe needs some help, you can raise your hand confidently and be like, oh, I do know how to work on this. I did a course on it. Or you can, again, you can volunteer, and you can volunteer somewhere where they have a version of it. You know, there's different versions of these technologies, and you can help out. So I think you definitely want to sharpen your axe as much as possible during the time that you're laid off, whatever you need to do. And again, getting certifications during that time off, that also shows employers, even if you're not working for a long time, that you are very much upward mobile. And it's something that they will value, even if it's not a direct one-to-one valuation. Like I said, I don't think you're ever going to get a job just because you got a certification, but that certification will tip the scales in your favor if they need that extra oomph factor. So for sure. But yeah, master's degrees, I think that they can be great. Wonderful. Schooling is cool, but I think you need to do it for the right reasons. Like if you're going to go and you're going to get a master's degree in engineering, don't do it just to get the degree. I hope you had a thought process beforehand. Same thing with an MBA. You shouldn't do it just because there's a lull and you're like, I need to do something, because
unless you have that time on your hands and the extra cash.
yeah, right. No, for sure. And again, if you just want it for yourself, that's fine too. But my whole point becomes, don't do it because you got laid off, because there are people that do that. Even outside of recession time or outside of mass time, some people get laid off for whatever reason, and they're like, all right, well, I'm gonna go get another degree. I'm just gonna go do that. And it's like, you're at a point where you have more degrees than a thermometer, and it's not helping your job anymore, right? So, yeah, I agree with you. That was my long way of saying that, Fran.
Cool. Thanks. Anything else we missed?
I think when it comes to, I think I want to circle back really quickly, not to dwell on it, but you talked about your support systems. I do want to say oftentimes we suffer in silence. Some people more than others, that's not in their DNA to like talk about how they feel, or if they're feeling helpless, or if they're feeling shitty. And keeping that bottled up is not healthy, and it's very stressful. And like the more responsibilities that you have, the more you don't want to let that out, but you need to have a support system. And LinkedIn is fine and dandy, but you need to have one or two people at least that you can just go and just tell them that the world is not okay for you right now. And I'm not just saying that from a kumbaya perspective. I mean, if you want to be effective in your job search and you want to not come off desperate, or you don't want to come off you don't want to come off that way, because even employers, if they see someone that's
flight thought again.
Yeah, because
baseline.
If I'm a hiring manager and I see this this person is super desperate for this job, like that's not, I don't want to say that's not attractive, but it's like, yeah, but like, do they really want the job, or are they going to get the job just to pay their bills and then they're going to leave? Now, again, earlier I talked about it, that you might need to take a job that's not a part of your career. And that's me from this perspective, but you also need to be empathetic towards the person in front of you in terms of the hiring manager. They want someone 9 times out of 10, unless it's a contract, they want someone long-term. And I'm not saying don't be honest, but at this, you got to do what's right for you. Right? You really have to do what's right for you. So you want to make sure that when you go into an interview, you kick ass. The way you do that is by mentally being prepared for it, which means some of these feelings that you're having, if you don't get them out to your friends, they're gonna see it in the interview, and it's not gonna be good for you, right? Yeah, that's just me being honest. I don't know if that's politically incorrect, but I just think that, you want to, when you go into an interview, you want to show the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy perspective. Like I think obviously depending on circumstances, everyone's situations will be different in terms of how much time they can spend doing that and the luxury of doing that. But I like, no matter your circumstance, I 100% echo and emphasize that feeling your feelings, processing the emotions tied to being laid off are really important for your overall well-being and being able to move forward. So I think wrapping up and summarizing everything we talked about today, it's a crazy time. There's still a lot of layoffs happening across the industry. If you are someone who has been laid off, like please, as Shubho was just reiterating, take care of yourself, take time to process, lean into your tribe, and lean on people to support you during that time and as you process those emotions. And then once you've gotten through that stage, make a plan. Think through what your goals are, what you need to accomplish, what your responsibilities are, and then make a plan based on that. Keep in mind the thought of having or needing to flex, whether it's by industry or function. Think about upskilling, areas where you can upskill, whether it's a training or a course. Maybe you need to redo your resume and then hit the ground running. It will get better. As Shubho said too, it's a cyclical market. The economy is cyclical. It will get better. So keep that in mind. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. If anyone wants to share experiences with us in the comments as you listen to this episode, please do. If anyone has feedback or advice for people who have been impacted, please share. We definitely want to cultivate this community to give you a space to share, but also for everyone listening to support if you have feedback or words of advice. So thank you all for joining.
Yep. And remember, you can comment on YouTube, you can comment on our socials. If there's anything we missed, if you have questions and you got laid off and you have questions, hit our social media. We'll do another episode if we have to. But yeah, with that, sincerely, Fred and Shubho.